with the meeting. So thank you for that. And we're going to hear different models related to the responses to food poverty, as well as some introductions and context. Just to begin with, Elaine's just going to say just a few words about the history of the church's response to food poverty. Elaine.
Right. It was really interesting because it got me going back to my kind of like university notes from 1996. All these go back when we had a guy called Stanley Holloway, and we were looking at the history of the church and the sort of and that sort of stuff. And what he started off by saying the test of a civilization is to look at the way a society in question treats its poor. And that's actually that's the baseline. So if we look at the way that we treat the people who are really struggling financially at the bottom, that kind of tells a lot about us as a society. What we did, we actually found that the church has been it's found imaginative ways, going back sort of a good 1,000 years, different ways of kind of helping people that were sort of struggling. And one of them that I was looking at, we were sort of looking at things like the craft guilds. And there used to be a craft guild actually in the Guildhall next door to the Cathedral, and that was the Corpus Christi Guild. But there was also one which was for the slightly poorer people, and that was the St George's Guild. But they were both from Leicester, and that was a good way of actually trying to help people where they could. We had memorial courts, and they were for supporting the elderly and the rural poor. And actually, even in the Cathedral, I think we actually had a manorial court in there at one point before we've had sort of way back in the past. Parishes had a thing that made me laugh. They said they had church stocks. Now, the first thing I'm thinking of is the sort of things where you put your hands and your feet in it and they throw rotten tomatoes at you, but it's not that at all. What it was a stock of cattle, sheep, land, houses. So say, for instance, you were recently widowed, the church could lend you a cow. If you needed some chickens, they could give you some chickens. So you look after the chickens for the church, and you get the eggs as a way. So they'd actually have practical ways of sorting those out. So that was really useful. It had almshouses for the sick and the elderly. So, like for instance, the student centre at the top of Welford Road for the Leicester University, that used to be an almshouse. And we've got the Wiggleston one, haven't we, down near De Montfort University as well. So we had almshouses that would look after, bit like sort of care homes, like maybe today. Parish dole, where you actually go off, and if you needed a pair of shoes for your children, you would go off and ask. So doling out food, clothes, pound loaves, those kind of things. And in the 14th century onwards, hospitality, we are on about hospitals. The word comes from hospitality. So there were places where the sick and the elderly and the poor could go to. So we've always had ways of dealing with kind of poverty and food poverty in the past. We've just got to find new ways of doing it now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Elaine, for that introduction. Okay. Welcome to those who are joining us on the call here. We're just doing an introduction to our evening with a little bit of the history of the church. So welcome also one of our other presenters, Katie Ray. Welcome to you as well. We're going to be from Christ the King Food Bank. We're going to be hearing just a little bit of your story just in a little while. It's great to have you with us as well. Before we look at some of the different models of response to food poverty in terms of on the ground, the work of supplying food banks and other food poverty or good food initiatives in many food poverty initiatives. And it's so very good that we have with us Simone Connelly, being the focus of the Bishop of Leicester's partnership with the Diocese going back to its earliest days. And lovely to have you with us, Simone, just sharing something around the work of FareShare Midlands and how that sits within this whole landscape of food poverty. Over to you, Simone.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I think many people on the call will be familiar with what FareShare does, but FareShare Midlands, for those that aren't, FareShare Midlands is part of a network of 18 independent organisations, and we're collectively known as FareShare. What we collectively do is we provide a solution to the food industry for when surplus food becomes surplus within the supply chain, and we redistribute that food to organisations based across the UK, organisations that are predominantly based in high areas of deprivation, areas that are quite food insecure, and supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. FareShare Midlands plays quite a significant part in the network. We're made up of 9 warehouses goodness knows how that happened. When we set up in 2008, Peter and I, we didn't have a warehouse. We had, I think, a van that we were loaning, and we used to operate from a church hall, all very remote. We had no funding, so we have, I think it's fair to say, grown significantly. I think really kind of due to the passion and the ambition of us all along the way to kind of protect our planet and save as much food as we can from being destroyed unnecessarily, and getting that food to the growing number of people in our communities that just need help with food provision and all the other wraparound support that our network of community food organisations provide. So FareShare Midlands, we don't support individuals direct. We get food to individuals through some amazing community organisations that are really at the front line of supporting individuals that really need support. So that's kind of a snapshot of FareShare Midlands and what we do. I've got a few slides just to show you, just to give you a bit of insight of how kind of we had to change during the pandemic, and then kind of what our direction of travel is now that, you know, the pandemic's obviously we're not out of the pandemic, but, you know, how we're trying to you know, navigate back to the solution that we think is appropriate for FareShare to provide to communities. So if I can share my slides. It's not going to work, is it? Yeah.
Well done.
And I'll go through these quickly because I know I haven't got a huge amount of time. So these slides do kind of represent the East Midlands. FareShare Midlands covers the wider Midlands from the East Coast to the Welsh border. These slides particularly focus on East Midlands, and I'll pick up some of the stats that are relative to Leicester and Leicestershire. But during the last calendar year, we redistributed just over 6,000 tonnes of food, and that contributed to 15 million meals that our network of members provided to their beneficiaries. What does 6,242 tonnes of food look like? Well, a tonne of food fits in a long wheelbase van. So if you can imagine 6,200 vans parked bumper to bumper full of food, that would have been not necessarily sent to landfill, but perhaps to renewable energy. If it wasn't for the FareShare network, that food would have been wasted and not gone to individuals who need it. So quite a lot of food. So the effect of the pandemic, so prior to March 2020, we were supporting around 400 community food members, that we call them. So that's a mixture of charities and community groups who are predominantly based in the highest areas of deprivation around our region. And a lot of these groups were running community cafes, lunch clubs, social kitchens, projects that really kind of, you know, bring people together to kind of eat communally, to socialise, to talk, to start to talk about the issues that they're faced with. But because of the pandemic, obviously all of those organisations had to close down. So what we saw is a huge increase in what we called emergency groups. So we can't open our doors, but we know that people still need food, probably more so now than ever. So there was a real emergence of emergency groups that, quite interestingly, would have been very difficult for us to support, because ambient food and kind of food parcel type foods that go into emergency food parcels, just there isn't the volume of surplus food available for obvious reasons. It's longer life, it just doesn't become surplus. So what actually happened at the time is that the government recognised that FareShare had quite a decent infrastructure. So we did actually secure quite a significant amount of government funding that enabled us to buy food. So that isn't, you know, that's not what we do as an organisation, but we altered models so that we could get as much food out to our community members and the emerging community members that really just wanted to support people that needed that support. So a complete shift and change in what we did. So the effect of the pandemic, so 70% of the organisations that were established in response to the pandemic said they were planning to continue. So that then faced us with a new challenge, because we had such an increase in numbers that we just weren't anticipating. And 70% of them saying, well, actually, we want to carry on supporting our communities. There's been real value in it, and, you know, there's real need for it. So we want to continue. So then the challenge for us as an organisation is the ambient food and the funding for the ambient food runs out. but actually we want to get back to being the environmental charity that FareShare is, and the food that we distribute is surplus to requirement. We don't want to buy food, that's not our model, but you know, that kind of coupled with we want to support people has been really quite, you know, an interesting challenge for our teams. So we are kind of, you know, trying to navigate back to you know, social eating spaces, community cafes, and supporting organisations to set up to do what they historically did, you know, either prior to COVID or supporting them to do that for the first time. So what was this telling us? So yeah, so here, so you can see nearly 30% of our members is made up of food banks, and that is a significant increase from figures before. You know, you've got 20% of our members who are providing meals and so on. I don't need to go through all of those, but I think the key thing is you know, FareShare as an organisation, we're not emergency food providers. There's other organisations like the Trussell Trust, and we'll look at some of their figures in a minute, they are food bank organisations. They are crisis providers. That isn't what FareShare does. We are part of a collective of organisations that are providing a variety of services and food solutions to our communities. And so we are trying to get back to, you know, trying to support organisations that can take the types of surplus food that are readily, you know, surplus. But it's a challenge, because I think, you know, the groups have got, it's not because it's necessarily, well, easy, but it's challenging for them into the current climate to you know, be bringing people in and eating communally, because then they've got energy costs, which we all know are really, really significant at the minute. So whilst they want to support their communities, they've got to do it in a very cost-effective way. But anyway, this slide is about the Trussell Trust, and most of you will know about the Trussell Trust. So they are the #1 food bank organisation in the country. I'd like to say we collaborate well with them. We supply some Trussell Trust with fresh food, but they are very skilled at, you know, getting the ambient food into their network that they need to then supply to their members who are in crisis and kind of have that emergency provision. What I would say though is, you may have read that they are also struggling for food in terms of people so they generally get their food from the general public donating, whereas FareShare, it's surplus food from the food industry. People are stretched, so you know they're not donating as much as they used to, but in contrast, clearly the Trussell Trust are seeing more and more people coming through their doors, and that kind of little graph there shows you the significant increase, the very steady sharp incline in numbers of food parcels that they've given out, so a 33% increase. And that if they had the food, that would be okay, they could cope, but you know, they're struggling for food. So it's incredibly challenging out there for the network of food banks. And then here, that was just kind of a summary of number of food parcels given out in the East Midlands. So last year it was 133,000. I can't quite see the slides. I'm doing this from memory, but you know, significant increases. And that picture isn't going to get you know, it's not going to get any better. I would expect to see a much sharper increase in food parcel handouts over the next 12 months due to the cost of living crisis. So what we do is, you know, we are needs-based. We're seeing significant increase in demand from our current members wanting more food, and also we're seeing new members just, you know, emerging and wanting FareShare supply. It's a challenge for us because although we know there's kind of 2 million tonnes of food that is being wasted every single year that could be redistributed, the logistics associated with redistributing more food are very significant and very costly. Running FareShare Midlands is so expensive now. I mean, today we've just looked at the budget for next year, and we've had to forecast, like all of us, we'll all be familiar with this, but 40% increase on our energy costs. We're having to pay our staff more because of, you know, staff retention, you know, fuel costs. We need more vans. It's the food industry. Whilst the food is there, their efforts are on making sure their shelves are full, and not necessarily the priority is getting their surplus food to FareShare. So, you know, managing those relationships and getting the food into the network is more challenging. It's costing us more to get the food that would ordinarily be delivered into us, but because of Brexit, the driver crisis, etc., it's just much more expensive porters to deliver the service that we know is in great demand. So it's certainly not getting any easier, but they're the reasons why we exist, not just the environmental reasons, but in Leicester there's nearly 30,000 kids that are living in poverty. Nearly 40% of kids that are growing up in poverty. Those figures are probably much worse now, and it's the same across the Midlands. We've just started working in earnest in Lincolnshire, and some of those areas are 60% of the children in some communities that are probably going without food. Their parents are certainly going without food. So it's all very challenging, but it's a challenge we feel is right to fight. And that, just new data released by the Food Foundation shows that continued rise in food insecurity across the UK compared with July. The figure has risen from 7.3% of UK households to 8.8%. I think that's higher now. I haven't got the most up to date, but it's certainly not getting lower. So, I think we all know that more households are either falling further into poverty or into poverty for the first time. So yeah, many households just don't have any additional money. So for them to see 40% increase in their energy costs and their travel costs is really dire and very, very difficult. So a bit of context about kind of how we changed as an organisation during the pandemic, and then our plans really are to try and support our community members as best as we can to not just provide emergency food parcels. What more can they do? What other kind of wraparound support can they provide? But it's a stretched sector. I'm sure everybody can agree with me on the call. Everybody wants to do their best, but I would have to say, I certainly, for my own workforce, we've got nearly 70 staff and lots of volunteers. We've kind of all hit a bit of a ceiling. We know there's, and we're also passionate about helping people in need. And all it is at the minute is kind of gone from one crisis to the cost of living crisis. And we just know that the need and the demand isn't going to go away. So, but we're up for a challenge, but it's hard. And I have to say that I probably share everybody's pain on the call, and anybody that's operating in a space. I know my sympathy is there with you, but FareShare Midlands is certainly committed to making sure we're committing kind of enough resource in time, if you like, and people to working with the food industry for unlocking all that surplus food that we know is still going into the bin or being wasted, and getting that food to our community organisations so they can do much more social good with that food.
Thank you very much indeed, Simone. That was, and thank you also for mentioning about the supply, giving us a really good insight into supply, the supply side, but also talking about the wraparound care as well. And as we go through the different models, we're exploring obviously how the actual physical acts of providing food or enabling food to be cooked, or how that's connected to care for people and valuing people and all of that. It'll be interesting to hear the different narratives that emerge from that. Before going into those models, we're just going to hear, so thank you very much, Simone. Before going into those models, we're going to just hear a little bit more context, broader from within the county. And we've got Sian Rigby with us, Food Poverty Officer at County Council, who's going to just talk about how the food poverty crisis looks from the county perspective. Over to you, Sian.
Good evening, everyone. So from a county perspective, my role started, first of all, because the Shire Grants team and others noticed that they were giving more and more funding to food banks to support food banks in the county. And that's a really important piece of work that needs support. But on its own, it doesn't address the longer term issues around food poverty, the reasons behind food poverty, and there is much more that could be done. So they advertised a post looking for someone to spend this year looking at how we might respond better in a more coordinated way across the whole county. So that's my task. As part of that, I've connected with our food banks, and I've also started drafting some proposals around some of those things. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context around the extent of the need that we're seeing in the county at the moment, because I from my previous work with Together Leicester, I'm very much aware that because the figures for Leicester City are so stark and so severe, as you saw from Simone's presentation, 30% of children in Leicester City are growing up in food poverty and facing poverty. And so that's a huge challenge, really. And when we look at that in comparison to the county, it can be easy to say, oh, well, the county's not got that kind of problem. And it's true that there is not significant areas of deprivation in the county in the same way that there is in the city. What we do have in the county is a lot of hidden poverty. We have areas which in the statistics show as 30% most deprived, but in reality that is because those areas where there is deprivation are mixed with areas where there's a lot of affluence. And so the overall figures don't reflect the reality that we see on the ground. So a couple of examples of numbers that I'm hearing from Foodbanks. In Melton Mowbray, there's one food bank for the whole of Melton Borough, and that food bank is currently has 450 plus people on their books. Most of those are from Melton, but I know that there are some that are from the rural villages around Melton as well. And I have heard stories of families who, due to particularly the increased cost in heating, bearing in mind that oil and LPG prices are not capped as the gas prices are capped, they cannot afford to heat their homes, they cannot afford to feed their children, they cannot afford to travel, even to get to work. And that causes huge concerns. In Harbour District, we have one of our food banks from Harbour here represented today, but I know that their weekly figures at the moment are around 30. And there's another food bank in the north part of Harbour, that Harbour District, that covers around 50 families a week at the moment. So for half of Harbour District, that is roughly 80 families a week that are being supported. For the villages around Stony Stanton, my most recent figure that I heard was around 36 families a week. In Charnwood, they have a food pantry model which is operating with members from Mount Sol, different parts of Charnwood, and different parts of Loughborough. And in total, that food pantry model currently has 650 members. And in addition to that, in the previous month, they gave out around 200 food parcels across the Charnwood Food Poverty Group network. So the figures we're talking about aren't as small as I think we'd sometimes imagine. And I'm anticipating, as Simone mentioned, we're all anticipating a much significant rise come the autumn, not least because we're expecting the cost of food to rise by the average of £380 a year. That's the figures out today, released by a think tank that's been researching this and was in the BBC News. And we've already been told to expect the fuel price cap to rise by more than 50% again in October. So there are some serious concerns on the horizon, in addition to what we've already got coming up. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Sian. And we'll have time towards the end for asking questions, and we'll probably take a break at some point as well, which may give a chance for chat for those people who know one another, who want to just catch a word with one another. But we're going to, as we say, we're going to be sharing a different range of models of response to food poverty. The first one of which is Foodbanks, not surprisingly. I know we got representatives here from Foodbanks, Newbucks Foodbanks, Lutterworth Food Bank and Jubilee Food Bank as well. We also have Katie Rays from Christ the King Beaumont Leys Food Bank. And Katie, it would just be really helpful to hear just how you've been responding to the food poverty and how your particular way of organising a food bank and anything extra that you do provide alongside the provision. Welcome, Katie.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is the sound on?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So we established our food bank about 11 years ago, and it was sort of a cupboard in a foyer area of the church that served just like families that were at that point just basically struggling with the basic needs. And over the years, we've developed into sort of a very large food bank now, serving a massive population of Beaumont Leys, Stocking Farm, New Parks, Braunston. We don't actually work with a postcode, but predominantly they're the areas that actually we support. So now, obviously, since COVID, or at the beginning of COVID, things changed dramatically for Christ the King. We was open 5 days a week throughout the whole time of the lockdown. We had amazing volunteers from all walks of life that were able to help us to deliver food to around about 500 families a day. So it put us into a completely different sort of light. It was no longer a few cupboards in the foyer. So things had to change quite dramatically and quite quickly. We built fantastic relationships with so many other organisations, lots of different charities that were able to work with us through that period of time. And the great thing is we've been able to continue with those relationships, which has been fantastic. And they continue to support us now because they saw the work that we was doing locally and they want to still commit to working with us, which has been fantastic. At the moment, we have a designated part of the church now that's been converted into a food bank. It's a bit like a supermarket now. We've, as I say, developed so many relationships that have helped us to develop the sort of the range of foods that we have on offer. And one of our main things is that we were able to offer healthy foods that we would all eat that at the moment people can't afford to buy. We work on what we call an emergency food parcel basis. So we have a very structured setup, really. So people have to be referred into our service. People do just turn up, but that isn't our model. But when someone turns up, what we do, we signpost them, we get them involved in services they need to be, but we'll also give them food on that day. We never send anybody away without food, and that's the important aspect. We're a non-profit organisation. We have no paid workers. We have around about 25 very committed volunteers, and we run over a 3-day period, and we do 2 hours a day. And in that time, at the moment, we've had an increase of about 40%. We're serving around about 250 families in that 3-day period. And they're all referred in. The agencies are all kinds, City Council, the Star Workers, mental health services, drug and alcohol teams. We work with so many organisations, it's unbelievable. But what we also have now, which is a fantastic additional benefit, is we have a benefit advisor on site 1 day a week. So we're looking at the whole picture. Yes, food is important, but we need to know what's going on in those families' lives. Are they getting enough finances? Are they being advised properly? Are they getting support with any perhaps debts that they've occurred during this difficult time? So we look at the whole picture, and that's proven to be really successful. I know a lot of the council workers that are, or star workers that are inundated with people, they've been able to offload some of their clients onto our service to get that support. So that's been great. I suppose one of the big things for us is that we have just taken on the majority, well, all of Action Homeless's food, sort of food bank work. It has increased our referrals because we get them now from the Department of Work and Pensions, which has increased our numbers. But we now have a van, which is a chilled van, which allows us to open up our horizon in terms of collecting produce from different other establishments. We have a commitment with Action Homeless that we continue to support other food banks in Leicester with surplus food. And at the moment, it's early days for us, but at the moment with our van drivers out, sort of like 5 hours a day, 3 days a week, and they're collecting any additional surplus food, whether it be chilled, ambient, whatever. And we supply other food banks. So we take it around to other food banks to keep them topped up, because we're aware that the demand is increasing for them also. So it's a great network at the moment, because we're really working together with other food banks and supporting each other, and building a great relationship as well, and hopefully supporting many families. Our remit is mainly working with families, but what we've noticed is that our referral criteria is changing dramatically. And one of the big things we're noticing is that our older population that only live on a state pension are really struggling. So we're looking at the moment on how can we help these people to look at their finances. I mean, at the moment, somebody who's on a state pension isn't really eligible for any other benefits, especially if they're in their own house. But if you imagine, they've got £100 and something a week to survive on. And we've had a lot of elderly people turning up saying, we've got £30 left to buy our food for the week. So that's been one of our big areas of concern at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello, Katie. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's just so good to hear about the teamwork, mutual support, one for another, and that's, you know, and also some of the ideas and the obviously the provision of advice around debt, as well as that additional bit of wraparound care. Really wonderful. And, you know, I look forward to hearing other ideas that people share this evening about how you add into the main offering, so to speak, other things that value people and help to grow them as facing so many challenges at this time, and supporting them. Thank you so much indeed. And for myself, I've got an opportunity just to share for myself. I think one of the purposes of this evening may be for those coming along who aren't involved in these different areas of response. It can be a bit confusing, and for me I found it trying to demystify and understand the different forms of response. So one of the ones I just want to share about as a model now is that of food pantries. My own experience of that is supporting one church, All Saints Belgrave, to open a food pantry earlier this year. There's different kinds of franchise that are involved in food pantries, but what I understand, and if I haven't got it quite right, people will correct me, I'm sure, is that what they have in common is that rather than being run on a referral basis, as with most food banks, food pantries are open to all, with the only restriction being that you have to live within the food pantry's area of operation. There's an assessment that can be made of individual needs of those who join, but this will only generally be to offer access to other support services. So they operate on a membership scheme basis. Members either pay a weekly subscription, entitling them to a weekly shop, or they pay a fixed amount for each shop. And that weekly subscription or fixed amount entitles them to choose groceries in the food pantry worth many times more than what they have paid. So we may hear a little bit later about community shops and supermarkets where membership is free, but it's deeply discounted food. You pay for each item, but this is a particular model where it's a subscription basis. The food pantry I was involved in was at All Saints Belgrave. It was a part of the Your Local Food Pantry social franchise, and that's one that is run as a partnership between where it originated in Stockport, a community benefit society called Skylight, and the national organisation Church Action on Poverty. And it is also a food pantry that is supplied by FareShare Midlands, which means that it also has refrigerated food stocked, as FareShare operates cold chain supply. As with so many other initiatives in this field, the food poverty response is only one part, and this particular food pantry is also connected to a cafe and social space that is also run at the church, enabling belonging and support. Just by contrast, another example of a food pantry franchise is what Sian referred to, I think earlier, the Your Store initiative in the Loughborough Charnwood area. And that's a local partnership between Charnwood Borough Council, the Bridge Project for the Homeless, Charnwood Food Action, Poverty Action Group, and the John Store Charnwood, which is an independent charity supporting voluntary activity. You may have heard of John Store House, the community centre they operate out of. So Your Store, very similar. It seeks to help not only provide food for the local community, but it'll also provide members with access to a wide range of free support services that can help with their overall support situation. Could be debt advice, similar to what Katie was referring to earlier, healthy cooking classes, CV writing, mental health and wellbeing support. So it's that kind of wraparound. And it also does some food, pop-up food pantries provision. One local place where that's done is the Good Shepherd Church Hall. So those are two examples of food pantries. I don't know, Sian, if you want to add anything, since I mentioned about the Your Store, which is actually in your neck of the woods. Anything just to add around that?
Yeah, so your store is great, and it's a really important model, and it's a model which I'm looking at, and it's something that actually I've really heard the stories from the members about the impact that it makes for them, in terms of the dignity it gives them, the choice it gives them, and the way that they feel that actually they're contributing to supporting the wider community as well, through being a member. And so that's a really important aspect of the food pantry model, is that people feel like it's their pantry and that they're giving back to it. And so that's really important. And pantries are certainly one of the things that I'm looking at in the course of my work as a possibility for the county. Richard, do you want me to say now the county council sort of context and distribution of?
Yes, because it's helpful to know about the different forms of distribution that work. Yeah, for people to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. So Richard mentioned about social supermarkets and discount stores, and those are great. There aren't many of them around at the moment. There is one, I think, in the Stocking Farm area of the city, and that operates on a yearly membership model, but then you go and you get a discount, get discounted products throughout the year. Most of the other social supermarkets that we have are the food pantry model, and at the moment there aren't a huge number of them, but as Richard mentioned, there are different franchises that operate. And so you've got your local pantry model that Richard described. You've got the Your Store model that he also talked about. And then you have a third model, community grocery model, which is run through the Message Trust directly in partnership with local churches. They all operate slightly differently in terms of suggested membership cost, what you get for that, how many times a week you can shop, and so on. So if you're interested in exploring those, please do have a conversation with Elaine later on. But also in the county in particular, I really want to encourage you to work and keep your district or borough council and myself as the county council food poverty officer in the loop. Myself, because I'm just trying to see what's happening and make sure that we aren't duplicating things across the same area and having gaps. District and borough councils, because as Richard mentioned, Your Store is a partnership model between Charnwood Borough Council and other organisations, and so that's the model that Charnwood Borough Council is seeking to use and wants to use within its area. So in the first instance, I'd encourage you to explore working with them. Whereas in other places where there isn't one set up, you could very easily explore the other franchise models as well, and then see which one is the best fit for you and for your community. So that it's about working out what works for your community, and not just in terms of the franchise model, but in terms of membership amount, in terms of times that you are open, and the other wraparound support and how that will work. So one of the other places that I'm working at the moment, there is a debt advice service in that local community. It's in Wigston, and they're looking as a partnership group to set up a food pantry, but actually it's unlikely they're going to be able to find a venue where you could have everything all together at once, but there will be people present to support and connect people across the debt advice, across the cooking skills, across all the other wraparound advice that it's important to offer.
Thank you very much indeed, Sian. In a sense, we're moving from something, it's less critical response, it would probably be fair to say, than the food banks, to moving towards encouraging ways in which budgeting and independence and that is the way forward. But we need both the critical responses, and we also need emerging patterns and also the wraparound care. So that's really helpful.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
thanks, Richard. I would say that food pantries provide a longer term response. It's not something we really want to have. It's not something we want to see people struggling to afford food, but at present, with the way our society works, we cannot change necessarily how our economy functions at the moment. But what we can do is work within that to ensure that people can access affordable food in a way that gives them dignity and choice. But that said, you need a crisis food provision, as Katie was talking about, because there will be people who cannot afford even £3 to £5 a week to pay for their shopping. So that's just the reality we have at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. We've come through a couple of models. I said we'd take a little break for those for whom that's helpful, just till 10 to 8. And perhaps that's an opportunity if anybody wants to ask a question on what we've heard so far. So, you can ask a question, or you can go and get yourself a cup of tea if that would be helpful, or anything else. Carol, keep an eye if anybody wants to ask a question on what we've heard so far, or to share in from anything that you're doing that relates to something of what we've just been sharing. So just do that for the next 3-4 minutes. Check if any questions coming in. Just indicate it with a hand if you want to on the wherever it is on your device. I almost wondered at one point whether to suggest that those of you who are involved in the food banks want to go in your own little room for a moment and have a chat with each other. I think, is it Lindsay and Alison from New Parks, and Colin and Paula from Lutterworth, I think that's right, and Liz from Jubilee Food Bank, isn't it? Yeah.
Hello, I think you mentioned Jubilee Food Bank while I was away.
Yes, I just trying to get you connected up. You may know each other already, the different ones that you are, but it's good to be together, isn't it? Yeah. You want to share anything from Jubilee Food Bank?
Well, we're having to change things again. So unfortunately, we can't deliver to the whole of Harbour District anymore. So from the 22nd of July, we're going back to working more with referral agencies and things like that. But we do have a really good shop called the Eco Village in Market Harbour, and they're starting to do things around food and food poverty. So it's a good thing to watch out for. They're looking at a community fridge. They've already got vegetables that people can just take. So a little bit, you know, they might not be the best vegetables, but they, you know, they need to move them. So they're looking at that, and they have meals that people can take, pay it forward type scheme. Unfortunately, you're finding it hard to get people through the door though. So we're trying to get the message out.
That's worth you hearing, Sian, I guess.
Yes, I think I missed some of it, although I work with Liz quite a lot in my work already. So I've already heard about the Eco Village and the community fridge. And I have a feeling my colleague who works in comms has tried to support them with getting the message out as well, but we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Good.
There's a question in the chat about student poverty, especially if on prepayment meters.
Oh, anyone got any thoughts on student poverty, especially on prepayment meters? Anyone want to chip in on that one? That's from David. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I did ask a question of someone working in the universities, and I was told that primarily it's around foreign students at the moment, particularly in Leicester, and I was asking the question around Leicester University because they have accommodation in Oby and Wigston. I think that's something I want to explore more. It's something I want to research more, because I'm conscious that it can be an issue, particularly once you go beyond halls of residence. Yeah, that I don't have a huge amount of information on that at the moment.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chip in?
Just so Richard, what we're seeing quite an increase in or certainly an appetite for setting up pantries in halls of residence and in areas where students can access. It is a real problem, along with, you know, all the other issues, but so it seems to be quite a keen kind of solution, is setting up kind of pantries where students can access food, and they have to pay a membership, which is something like £3.50 a week, and they get, you know, £15 to £20 worth of food. But certainly I think there's kind of more pantries being set up in the West Midlands, but certainly a model that could be considered for Leicester and Leicestershire. So it's not a food bank, but it's a pantry. Certainly halls of residence and different kind of university spaces do kind of lend themselves to being able to store food and then therefore for students to access. So it's something it's something we've thought about in the past, because we know that students do struggle, but certainly we're now seeing inquiries come through to us, you know, what can we do to support with these types of models. So yeah, definitely you know, it's I don't think it's a new problem, but I think there's more awareness certainly now, you know, from students in that there's more support that can be offered.
Thanks, Simone, and thanks, David, for the question. And you know, that's helpful, worth checking in with possibly those who've spoken. I know Elaine's put her email address in the chat already, and that maybe one or two others of us will be able to do the same, so we can connect with one another after this. So we're going to welcome back, everyone. We're going to just continue with a few more models. We heard mention of community fridges just in one of the questions, and that may be something we may share about. But first of all, Alison Adams is with us, and one of the things we may be able to share about a little bit is about cook and eat hubs, Alison, and particularly some of the projects you've been involved in, where also that there may be, I think, the community hubs involved as well. And anything else you just want to share on that at the moment, Alison? Welcome.
Thank you. Sian is the real expert on cook and eat hubs, but I am going to say something briefly about those, and I know Elaine is then going to speak about community kitchens, which are deeply related to cook and eat hubs. But this is about initiatives which enable people to learn to cook cheap food, good food, nourishing food, healthily. And that's a part of the jigsaw that needs to be explored very often. What happens with a cook and eat hub is that you can actually you train up someone, within the local community who can then, work with people in the local community. You're not beaming someone in to do the work. It is owned by the community and it is local people doing it. And Claire knows something about this because I think that was going on at St. Chad's, and it's gone on at one or two other places within the city. So do consider what people do with the food once they've got it. That's a real key issue in here. And that leads me on to the other side of things that I wanted to talk about, which has already been mentioned. I heard Katie mention other things that are going on alongside the food bank. There is a real drive to try and make places where people gather in community, whether it's a food bank, whether it's a church, whatever it is, be a hub where that people can actually comfortably access other help. It is not easy for folk to seek help. And if you have to go along to an office somewhere else, you're not going to necessarily do it. But if there's a friendly person where you're already connected in and you are doing something else, like connecting a food parcel, like having a cup of coffee in a cafe, like having a lunch club meal, whatever it is, if other services and signposting, crucially, is there, then it is possible to help people in a much more holistic way. And I really do think that we as church have a lot to offer in that, because we are de facto, by our very nature, community hubs. We just need to expand that in practical ways, I think, a little. It's not rocket science. You don't need to know anything about everything. You do need to know who's providing what where. That's quite helpful. And we can certainly help on that. And if I just tell you that among the many sort of groups I interact with and listen to, it is absolutely crucial at the moment that the deprivation, that the poverty, that the debt, that world is in not in crisis, but it really is very difficult to get the advice you need. Now, I'm not saying to us that we need to become debt advisors. We don't have those skills. But we might be able to develop something alongside and in company with some of the places which have already developed that kind. The Martyrs has got Money Matters. Colville has got a community money advice centre. Melton Mowbray has. So we don't have to reinvent, but we might be able to add capacity in there somehow. And on a different theme, don't think that it's so little or so meaningless. Just to be able to offer coffee and a listening ear is so important. It needn't be anything grand. It needn't have a major structure, but it's a place for people to go phew, and for listening ears to then try and help them navigate the system in some way, or just offload. So I do know of places which are naturally moving into that mode and putting that alongside food banks and community shops and all the rest of it without much hassle. That's not a big step to make. There's plenty of expertise out there. Do come back at me about any of that sort of thing, because I can put you in the right direction as to people who are up to that sort of thing. But post-pandemic, when you think of the mental health crises that are emerging, and I go right back to when we had the Bishop's Poverty Commission years ago, I remember talking to some people with mental health issues, and they said, just give us a room and let us talk and give us some coffee. That will help so much. So we don't have to be experts in it all. We have to know when to move on, but we can actually be really, really loving and helpful just in the context of our very limited, perhaps, numbers of volunteers, spaces, or whatever. I think that's all I'll say for the moment, Richard.
Thanks ever so much, Alison, and do pop your email in the chat just for any who haven't got that already, to be in touch for the offer there, and the reminder of simple things as well that are so key in wraparound care. So Elaine, do you want to share to us a little bit, as you said, about community kitchens, community allotments, and anything else that is within the spectrum that there is?
Of course, yes. It's been really interesting, actually, because I'd never actually really heard about community kitchens as such until I started this role and started digging down into it and trying to find out what it was about. And it's really interesting because it's sort of like, I think what I've found is that the simpler the project is, the more it's the more successful. You start small and you start simple, and then see how your community reacts to it. So so you might have, I don't know, a community kitchen, but actually you might have 5 different places, and they're all going to be slightly different because they're going to be relating to different people. So you might, if you had one in maybe Spinney Hill, it's going to be a totally different community kitchen than it would if it was on the Saffron Lane estate. So it depends on the people that are using it and how they interact with it. But ones I've been looking at, different ways that we could do things. I mean, there was one particular project I looked at, and it was called the Need to Talk. And need is KNEAD, and it's about making bread. So actually it's about getting people who are feeling a little bit anxious, getting together, making some bread. And while the bread's rising, they're sitting down, having a cup of tea, chatting about how their week's gone. And they've got the smell of the bread cooking, and it's just an absolute joy. And it's just the idea, it's just a lovely idea, but it's really simple. It's yeast, a bit of water, a bit of flour, a community oven. Fine, that's really, really good. There's been things like community food cupboards and larders. Now, this is like something that we actually did at St. Chad's. We just had a cupboard, and people would come along and they would donate, particularly baked beans, because this is a predominantly Asian area, and they don't necessarily like baked beans, and we don't necessarily like chickpeas, so we would kind of swap them. So we had lots of baked beans. But that was really good because people from the Avonside estate at the back or on the Colne estate would come in and sort of say, oh, it's been a bit of a hard week. And I'd go, oh, we've got a couple of tins of baked beans. Do you want to take them off our hands? Yeah. And they'd go up and they'd feel they were doing us a favour. We were doing them a favour. But everything was kind of, it was really nice. And that started to make relationships. We also started doing tea and toast sessions. So all it was is when in the morning, putting the kettle on, having some tea, like a loaf of bread and some milk. Say probably cost us like £2 a session. And all we would do is put on tea and toast, but having that open space that people could just come into. And that sort of really worked well. Community kitchens, we sort of tried these, but the community kitchens, community kitchens are really good. What we're aiming at is quite often when I look in as a woman in my older years, I can look at a sort of a pantry and I can say, okay, we've got flour, we've got milk, we've got bread, we can make a cheesy mac, we could make something. My children, when they were at school, didn't actually have the benefit of cooking lessons a lot. So they're looking at the pantry and going, there's nothing in there to eat, let's ring up for a pizza. And that's probably that could be anything up to 20 quid for just a pizza being delivered. What we need to do is get people so they can look at things and have basic things in their pantries, look at the things that they're picking up from the food banks, look at the things they've already got stored and say, okay, this might be a bit weird, but we're going to cook this. I mean, one of my favourites at the minute is I do chow mein, but I do a sausage chow mein. And then just cut them up and put it in afterwards. It's lovely. It's really nice. But it's about sort of getting those basic cooking skills, making things that are really tasty, delicious, and making it fun. If it's not fun, people aren't going to come. So it's about making stuff that's really fun, really easy, good community, good cooking, good food. And that's what we're trying to sort of actually promote at the minute with a lot of our churches, particularly sort of trying to get to do like small groups of cooking. You don't have to have loads of people. You don't have to have a big, massive industrial kitchen. All you need is a small room, a few plug points, a few good friends. Just come in and just do some cooking. Just have the fun. It's brilliant, and it doesn't have to cost an awful lot. And there are places where you can get, if you're out in the county particularly, and you need some help, you can either go see Sian or you can see me, but we actually know people who can maybe sort of fund a few little kind of induction cookers or some kettles or some pans if you need them. So there's all that sort of stuff, and we're looking for the similar sort of things in the city as well now. So get in touch with us. We'll find some funding somewhere for it. That'd be brilliant. One of the other things I've been looking at is what I used to have a thing where people would come to church and they would just bring random food, and we'd have potluck lunches. Well, this is like potluck sharing cooking things. So what you do is you get a load of stuff you've got in your cupboard that's just about to go off. You think, okay, it's in date, it's still good to eat, bring it along, put it on a table, and then work out between you how you're going to cook it. It's kind of fun. I mean, you could have all sorts of things. You could have sort of, I don't know, chili pasta or something. Mix it up. So, but that's a fun way of using things up. We've got community fridges. Now, these are a really good idea, and I've seen a couple of these down at Cynthia's kind of community shop. She's got some fridges, and there are lots of other places that have got them as well. And this could be a domestic fridge, but to put things like milk and eggs and yogurts and stuff, the fresh items and stuff, the kind of things that FareShare would send to you. So you could get for those. But make sure you've got a fridge thermometer and that you've actually done your level 2 hygiene and all the rest of it, because you need to know, if you're storing food, you need to know how to do it properly, how to do it safely, because we want people to have fun but also be safe. So we've got all sort of that stuff, do about stock rotation, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of good. You could do it with a small fridge. If you wanted to go a bit bigger, I think Alison's got contacts where she might be able to put you in touch with somebody where they've got the commercial ones with the glass fronts on. So have a word to us. We can find some that maybe will be very low in cost, or we can put you through to people. Usually they're ones that have been used in shops and stuff that have been kind of repurposed. But yeah, they're ideal. Okay, so we've got professional ones. Just give us an email. Other things we've got, the silliest one I've found is a phone box pantry. In Houghton, they haven't done it yet, but they've got a red phone box, and you can buy these or adopt these from BT for £1, and they will take out the phone, strip it out, and you can use it for what you like. At the minute, they're using it as a library, but there's no reason why you couldn't put tins of things in them. And actually, so that would, so for a parish council, £1 investment on a sort of red book, and then sort of a box, and then you just fill it with tins of things or packets or long life sort of stuff. So that could be an interesting one where you can go along and just see what's in there. Community freezers, very similar to the fridges. One of those I've seen is down at the Gold Hill Adventure Playground. They've actually got a sort of a community freezer. They will take meat and burgers and things that are maybe within a week or two, and they will put them straight into the freezer, and people can come along and take £1/2 of mince, that sort of stuff. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Good way of preserving food. Mobile pantries. This is another thing we've sort of seen. I think sort of that's something that maybe sort of Sian would sort of probably know more a little bit about than me, because it's more of a rural thing. The ones that I've read about have been in Cornwall, where it's really rural, and they'll have a bus set up, or sometimes they've even had things like ambulances that they've turned into, or there's anything really, a milk float, all sorts of things. Turn them into a mobile pantry and take them down to the villages on certain days, and people can use it. So it gets the food out where it needs to be. Pop-up pantries, that's another one I've heard of. One of them I heard was where a woman who was actually taking food out in the boot of her car, opening the boot up and giving it out. And some folks were getting a little concerned about this. So they looked into it and found that actually she was kind of working with a local charity. She was fully trained. She was an ex-chef. She was doing it all kind of perfectly well. But she got regular people coming on a regular basis to pick up food from her. The city councils have done pop-up pantries. They do them in the libraries in the city during the summer holidays when the children are on a holiday. And you'll also find them in places like the Adventure Playgrounds have been doing it as well. It's worked really well locally on the Saffron Lane, where they've had the bags and they've been taking them out. I think they were saying something like 2,000 sort of families a week or something, or a month were coming to pick stuff up. I mean, that's worked really, really well. And because they're familiar places that you kind of you go past them every day, so you're kind of familiar with them. So That's okay. The bring and share kind of kitchens where you've got your random food. We've just mentioned that one. Junk food cafes. There's one in the West End Neighbourhood Centre on Andrews Street. And what they do is they are just making food. They make it up, and then you pay as you feel, is the way they put it. If you can only afford 50p, you put 50p in. If you can afford £50, you can put 50. You put in however you feel, and then that's quite a good one. And it's usually all food that would be normally sort of like labelled for going to landfill, but it's still really good food to eat. Community eating spaces. We've just had quite a few examples of that during the Jubilee and stuff, when we've had the big lunch, when we've had churches and street parties and people creating social spaces where we come together and we just bring food, and it's a joy. It's like having a party. Brilliant stuff. And also the places of welcome that Sian was sort of promoting about a year or so ago, weren't you? Going around to different churches and saying, can you just be open to anybody come in, free of charge, regular basis, be a place of welcome, and go on a list so that people know where it is. So
it was longer than a year or so ago, but
yeah, was it? Well, we sing quite soon, actually.
But they're great. Please do look into them if you haven't heard them before, because they're fabulous. Elaine can probably tell you more about them now.
Yeah, you've got community cafes. I mean, the ones that I've looked up have been things like the King's Coffee House, which is actually run by Holy Trinity. You've got the 6 Degrees Coffee House that is run by Open Hands. My head's working now. Oasis Coffee down in Hugglescote. That's absolutely brilliant. And what they do is they theme their cafe. So on a Monday, it will be sort of a mental health cafe. Then they have a women's cafe. Then they have a men's, and then they have mums and tots on another day. So they actually theme them around different things, but it's just opening up coffee, tea, hospitality, but a different kind of like way of doing it every day. Community stores. We've found the more I look for them, the more I kind of seem to keep finding. I mean, we've got Open Hands have actually gone from being a community pantry to a community store, and they're on the Willow Street, Wanlip Street, actually in town. They've got quite big, so they do the food bank first thing, and then they run a sort of a community store afterwards. We've got Zynthia's store, which is right in the middle of the city, which is down near the town hall and the fountain, down Bishop Street. So you've got that one.
Those would be, Elaine, those would be the ones where you're, the supermarkets where you're paying at a reduced rate, which is that one that's like Sian was referring to earlier, which is where it's a heavily discounted amount. And wasn't there also some about growing food as well that we've got Thurmby Lodge and that's sort of one model that's worth mentioning? I think we involved that. I can't remember the involved that one.
Yeah, community allotments. I mean, yeah, we've had sort of some community allotments. There was a lady called Helen Petman who was running a community allotment on the Coleman Road, and we had some people from St Chad's were going up there and helping sort of like to do things. That was interesting because what the community allotment people wanted to grow vegetables that you can't get in the normal shops, things that people couldn't really afford, and because it's a predominantly Asian area, they wanted to do that. So they started linking with our Asian community, our Asian lunch club that used to meet on a Wednesday at St Chad's. And some of the ladies there said, look, we'll show you how to do it. And I think the city council gave them like one of them polytunnels, which made it was nice and warm. It was the ideal place for growing peppers and tomatoes and ladies' fingers and all sorts of things. So things that I've never seen before, which is quite exciting. So the community allotments in that sense. But even if you haven't got an allotment, it could actually be a few pots at the back of the church. Again, sort of Chad's have tried doing, we're sort of doing some little pots of salads that we're doing. We're growing lettuces and radishes and runner beans and all sorts of things at the minute. Only little bits, but we're just starting, but it's getting really good.
I know also that that I believe it's right in saying that there's one initiative where there's thinking around having planters that you can put in certain places where you can grow the food sort of more publicly and help people in growing food, and even potentially with faculty mission within churchyards that you could have planters that would enable you to grow food there. So there are, that's just another idea I believe is going around.
Yeah, there's and one of the things they do in Houghton, I'll do this with the last one. So down in Houghton, what they do, they just have a sort of a community Facebook page. But what somebody will do is say, all right, I've got a load of land, a sort of apples, a load of, and they go into sort, does anybody want them? And they just say, I'll put them on a box, put them in the front garden, come and collect them. And then you'll get somebody else will be sort of doing sort of apple pears or whatever, or carrots and so on, and even eggs. We've even had people doing eggs. So I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. When we've got excess food, let each other know on social media. Let your church know. Even, I mean, St. Christopher's, we used to have allotment people bringing food and just leaving beans at the back of church and just pick them up as you go out.
Wonderful.
There's all sorts of things.
Thank you. I mean, thank you, Elaine, for really getting us inspired. That there are so many different ideas that you can run with or pick up with, depending on what the interests are, what the culture is like, what the gifting is, and that can all help towards developing people's gifts and skills and recognizing the resources that there are. And as David shared just in the chat also, that you can simply have surplus where there is surplus coming from allotments. So that's a simple thing to be checking on. And it's, as we have with Simone at the beginning, so often the food is out there. It's how one actually enables generously for it to be shared with different people. So I hope that some of these ideas are, as we say, we're just trying to give a whole spectrum of ideas here this evening. And for those of you watching online on the recording, we hope that it's helpful for you in your thinking and planning around what you might be thinking of doing. And please do, as we've said, be in touch with those who put their details in the chat. But if you're watching a recording, then do please be in touch with myself or Elaine, and we can try and connect you. And I think just one of the things we want to obviously give a little bit of hints about, so how do we begin, and how, if we're thinking of doing a project, you know, are there any good tips to be following? And we're thinking about that. I think, Alison, you're going to just share a few to get us, just to help those who are at that beginning stage.
Absolutely. Just an example, really. I chair the Homelessness Charter for the city, and one of the things we get very exercised about is people saying, oh, nothing is happening, nobody's feeding the homeless, we'll start something. And actually, what they don't know is that something is already happening. And I think that's really quite salutary. Do find out what is going on in your area. Don't quote me on this, but it's very easy for the bigger groupings, and I would put councils in that, to think that they own, control, and know what's going on. And actually, some of the most creative things are coming from outside that arena. It's worth checking out with other networks beyond our particular patch. Yeah, do your research really on all of that, and do not reinvent the wheel. But within all of that, we all need to assess what is right for our community. What fits community A will not fit community B. You know, and just to be clear on that, and to be wise really in all the smorgasbord of what's out there. What is right for your community? If you have a plant, a church building, whatever you've got that really can't sustain all sorts of stuff, then don't try and do it. Try and do something that you can do within the physical framework that you've got, but also think creatively beyond that, because perhaps by partnering with somebody else, you can do it. One of the things I found out with working with certain groups developing stuff was the enthusiasm is absolutely marvelous, but you've got to have a sustainable business plan. And you know, we can help on that. You know, I've worked through business plans with different groups, and you know, it has to be so. We can help too with actually thinking about where we might apply for funding and all of that sort of thing. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with us about that sort of thing too. And yeah, go out there and research, go and have a look at what other people are doing. That's a really good thing to do. We've mentioned so many things, you know, from Beaumont Leys to, you know, Money Matters to community kitchens in Loughborough, you know, you name it. Go and see some of these, whether they're on your patch or not. And by all means, contact me, Elaine, Richard. We'll try and help with whatever.
Thank you very much indeed. And I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's been fascinating this evening hearing about how there are initiatives going on which within local councils are doing and playgrounds. And as you say, just maybe just joining in with what's going on, giving extra help, and in that way getting a bit of an understanding of what this whole area of food poverty, which is so fast developing so tragically at the moment, and the needs that there are and the ways responding, how that's developing, to give a bit of an idea of, or perhaps what is it that we could do in some small way. And who knows, as we've heard some of the stories of things that began in a cupboard in a back of a church and is now feeding 250 people on a referral list, how things can grow from small things. And that's a picture of the kingdom of God, which Jesus gave us to reflect upon. And it applies so much to so many of the ideas that have been nurtured in this area. The story of FareShare Midlands, from where it began so many years ago, and how that's mushroomed as well. Recognizing that that shouldn't be the case, that we should be needing to do this, but it is a world of need. And we're called to do what we can in response and work together as a way of doing it. We've just got a final few minutes just for any questions, and we've welcomed that, or actually any reflections or suggestions, because we recognise there's wisdom in the room. It's just for the last 10 minutes. Caris will be able to help direct, I'm sure. Do, you know, put your virtual hand up, put something in the chat, bring some encouragement, however you want to just contribute at this point in our gathering.
There's a long post in the chat already about a mentoring project from Jojo.
Oh, thank you, Jojo.
Hi, yeah, that's me. So I work for the Bridge Homelessness to Hope, which is just over the road from Open Hands, which was mentioned earlier. And I run a mentoring program. So I work with people who've experienced homelessness or might be at risk of homelessness, which is a very broad spectrum. So I work with a lot of people, and essentially I match them with a mentor for a period of 6 months. They'll meet. We also have video relationships going now too, thanks to COVID. So, you know, there are many ways that we can connect with people, and often food poverty is like the start of it, you know, and we help people with loneliness, self-esteem issues, a wide range of mental health issues, and you know, and yeah, basically it's a way of helping food poverty too, and putting them in touch with the right people and getting their finances assessed and things like that. So if there's anybody.
Thank you, Joe. I think you just dropped off, but I think you were just finishing off to say if there's anybody who'd like to be in touch, you've put your email address in the chat, and we know based on the Matthew's estate where the bridges and all the work that it does, helping us to see that, as we heard earlier, that so often some of the referrals that Katie referred to come from people who are experiencing different forms of challenge in life, and how that can connect into some of the work the Bridge is doing and the mentoring that's there as well for those we find perhaps connected to our food bank or our food poverty initiative who connect into being more homeless or vulnerably housed. So thank you very much for that, Jojo. Any other questions coming in?
Richard?
Or comments? Yes?
Hi, it's Katie.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I wanted to mention 2 other initiatives that we're sort of like have started doing, which I didn't in my first talk I did. So one of the other new things that we're doing is working with the young offenders team now in Leicester. And so people that are having to do a payback service, young people under the age of 18, we're now, they actually sign up and come to the food bank, and with their own personal skills, like recently we just had a young lad who was an amazing cook. He actually used some of the produce from the food bank and made cakes and supplied our Tuesday Friends coffee morning, our elderly group that takes place at the church on a Tuesday. He made cakes for their morning. And we've got another young girl coming along who does all these fancy nails and eyelashes and all this. She's a beautician. She's done her training. And it's going to give the opportunity of young mums that come to the food bank that can't afford to have these new trendy things done. They'll be able to pay a small fee that will go to the food bank, and she'll do their nails for them and things like that. So we're doing lots of work with the young offenders team now as well. Wonderful. Which is successful. And also we've got one more initiative that starts through the summer, and that's you talked about coffee mornings and having people coming into the building. So on a Wednesday, through the summer holidays, we're going to be running a coffee morning, a chat morning on a food bank day, and they'll be able to see the church as well, see what goes on in the church. They can bring the children, and there'll be some craft work for the children to do through that 6-week period. So they're two sort of initiatives that we're sort of running at the moment.
Thank you, Katie, very much indeed. And yes, Wendy, you had your hand up. Is that a question or comment?
Do we know yet what provision the county has made for feeding the children who would normally get school meals all through the holidays?
Okay.
I think I can come in on that one. So yes, the county council are working very hard on their holiday activities and food projects. It's mostly running through schools. And I know they've identified key locations. I will look up for you, Wendy. If you send me your email, send me an email to my work email, I can look up for you how if your church wants to get involved, how you can apply, or what you want to know. I can try and look that up for you or find that out. Because I'm not directly involved in the Holiday Action and Food project, but I am contributing to it in terms of trying to make sure that it targets everywhere that's needed.
Good.
Thank you very much indeed, Wendy. Any other? Was that helpful? Yeah, good. Any other questions coming in just finally before we finish?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, just to echo what's already been said about doing what you can and starting small. As a small church, we've often been daunted by trying to partner with organisations that say, give us an upfront fee and 12 of your volunteers, which is beyond, our capabilities. So as Elaine said, starting small, doing what you can, and then seeing what opportunities there might be for funding. Another observation is making sure things are open and non-stigmatizing. And when we've tried to do things, we've put on, we had, as Elaine knows, the Make Lunch initiative a few years back. And what we've tried to do is just to say, this is for everybody. You don't have to be a particular kind of person. You don't have to be referred. We put a flyer around the school and just that everyone's welcome, and donate if you can. If you can't, don't, it's fine. It's for everyone, and you don't need to be pigeonholed or categorized to come and join with us.
Yeah.
Good.
That was great. And hearing, as Elaine was showing earlier from St Chad's, that's the experience you've had there, and experience there people can check in with, and do connect into Elaine, who has experience of that as well. Yes, we're thank you, Alison, yes, for commenting about how we can seek to offer help with funding and sourcing ideas. And I think there's a potential network here, and if you feel this has been a useful evening this evening, just for us to be in the same room together, where we've brought extraordinary collection of people involved on the ground, involved in the supply, involved in developing and enabling things to happen, as well as those exploring ideas, then we'll run something again like this. But I think we'll promise we'd keep it to an hour and a half. So I think that's an opportunity for me to say a very big thank you to those who've come along, especially to share with us, even those who've been our presenters. And thank you to those who have asked questions and made comments and made suggestions as well. And we hope also that those watching this recording find it helpful and do be in touch with us, Elaine, Alison, myself, from Social Responsibility panel, particularly in Together Leicester, if you want signposting towards any of the activities you're thinking of running. I'm just going to close with a Bible verse, which is from the Old Testament, which is one of those extraordinary promises and visions that we receive in Scripture that God gives and speaks out to the world in the prophet Isaiah, Isaiah 55, where we read, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost." We have a generous God who calls us to respond generously to those who are around us and to reflect his gracious generosity in how we do that. So be encouraged. Thank you to everyone who's contributed, and I hope you have a very peaceful evening. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.